Hello everyone. In this video, which is going to be short, we're going to talk about variables and constants in Python. One of the big advantages of Python over something like C++ is that you do not need to declare the types of the variables, and the types are deduced from the numbers or the values that you type. So when I type in a equals 5 and no decimals, I expect it to be an integer. When I say 2.6, I expect it to be a floating number. When I have these quotations, I expect it to be strings and so on and so forth, true and false to be Boolean. So that's the big advantage. The names of the variable, just like C and MATLAB, should only include letters, numbers, and underscore, and the first part should not be a number. It can only be an underscore or a letter. What else do we have? The other thing is Python does not have the built-in double data type, like C++ has float and double, and long, and all those. In Python, you have integers and you have floats. The other important thing is single quotations and double quotations make no difference in Python. They are both of type strings, basically. And true and false and any value that you get out of logical operations can be a Boolean operator. You have to have the first letter of true and false capitalized. Then we can create arrays that are imported from the module NumPy or the library NumPy. We have complex numbers that if you want to create complex numbers, you have to use the keyword complex and then pass the real and the imaginary part. And we also have 4 built-in data types in Python that I have a separate video, and I'm going to go into depth of these. Just here, I want to mention them so you know about them, but we have a separate video on each and every one of them and a couple of videos on the arrays and matrices. So just letting you know that we have list, we have tuples, we have dictionary, and we have sets in Python. So as compared to an array or a vector, you know what it is, right? It's basically a set of numbers that have a contiguous memory allocation, and they are ordered and indexed, right? So this is entry number 1, that's entry number 2, and so on and so forth, right? Let me just change these numbers so they don't necessarily, the numbers and the entry index are not the same. And typically what you do with arrays is they only can store one type of data. So they only store numbers, or like they store characters or something like that. If you want to store heterogeneous type of data, right, then arrays are not going to work. That's where you can resort to something like a list. A list is, first of all, the data does not need to be homogeneous. So you can store heterogeneous data like here. So you can see here, most of them are strings, but this is a number, right? And I can add, for example, a Boolean here and anything else. And it does not necessarily need me to have the data to be of the same class. So I can here store a Boolean as well. And I can store, let's say, a decimal number and complex number, or anything for that matter. It does not have any problem. The other good thing about it is if you have duplicate data, so here you see this 2023 in quotation mark and this one, they are the same thing. And if you have duplicate data, there is no problem. And just like an array, a list has index and orders. So this is your entry 0, this is your entry 1, this is your entry 2, and so on and so forth. So lists, and you create the list with brackets and separate the entries or the numbers with comma. So lists are more like arrays, but they are more, I would say, more generalized, and they can store heterogeneous data. This, if you want to compare it with MATLAB, your arrays are like the regular arrays or matrices, And lists are like cells in MATLAB. Remember cells in MATLAB that you could store different types of data? So lists in Python are very similar to cells that you had in MATLAB. Then we have tuples that you create them with parentheses. And these tuples are interesting that they basically, one of the important things is a tuple. As you can see, it has this index and order here, but the important thing about it is it's immutable, which means you cannot change the definition of it. You cannot add any entry to it. You cannot remove anything from it, and it is gonna stay kind of the same all through the program. It's a list that you cannot change. Okay, so that's called tuples. And then we have dictionaries, which have basically keys and values. And here basically it's like a dictionary that you have in real life, that you want to know about a word. Each word acts basically for you like a what? Like a key to that value, right? So when you look up some word, you look for that word, and then in front of that word you see an explanation, right? So that's the same thing here. So I have pairs of keys and values, and typically most of the time the order is reversed. So you have this EEA, and then you have column 1 and then column 2 and so on. So these numbers are what we call keys, and then here are those explanations or the values associated with them. So each is a pair, right? So I know the value associated with 4 is Python, and the key associated with Python is 4. So we can look up each one based on the other one. And dictionaries basically act like a map. And then we have sets that are unordered. So the order does not matter. Like this, I'm not going to call entry 0, this I'm not going to call entry 1, and so on. They cannot hold duplicate data. They can hold heterogeneous data, and they are mutable, which means you can change them after they are created, just like a list or a dictionary. So list dictionaries and sets, you can change them after you create them. Tuples, you cannot. And then list and tuples, they are ordered. Sets is not ordered, which means you cannot go from entry 1, entry 2, and so on and so forth. Dictionaries are pairs. And then you can see the differences, right? Some of them do not hold duplicate data, like sets, while lists can hold duplicate data, and it's not a problem. So each one has its own property. So these are the 4 built-in classes of data, and arrays are basically imported from the library of NumPy. So here I have created all these variables, and I give them a name for each variable. And then here I use the command type to show you the type of each one of these variables. So if I go ahead and run it for you, you can see that this number 5 is integer, the number 2.6 is float. As I said, there is no double. Both single quotation F and double quotation hello are strings. You can see there is no character like you had in C. It's only strings. That true or false is Boolean. And by the way, as you'll see later in Python, we use and, or, and not. We just type them. We do not use the symbols, although we have those symbols for somewhere else, those bitwise things that we talk about, the ampersand and so on. This is the NumPy and dimensional array in general, this array here. Then we have lists, then we have tuples, we have dictionaries, we have sets, and then we have complex numbers. So these are all sorts of different variables you have. And a couple of other things about variables is you can assign several variables to a single value in one single line. So you can say f equals g equal h equal 10. You don't need to say f equal 10, G equal 10, H equal 10. Can assign this 10 to all three of them in a single line. The other thing you can do is you can assign three different variables to these, three different numbers to these variables, again in one single line. So here F is going to be 10, G is going to be 20, H is going to be what? 30, and I'm not going to put any of the left or right side here in any parentheses, any brackets, or anything. Okay, so these are some different versions to assign numbers or values to the variables, okay, in a single line instead of several lines here. So I just wanted you to see that. And the last thing I want to talk about is constants. By default, Python does not have anything called constant. Remember, in C++ we have constants. In Python, you don't. So the only way that in Python programmers try to indicate something is constant and do not change it is they use all capital letters for the name of that variable and then treat it as a constant. So wherever they see a variable with all caps, they are not going to change the value of it. But there is no such a thing as constant in Python as opposed to C++. So hopefully this video was useful to you. I'll see you in the next lecture.